Hello everyone, Stealthy Sharon here, and I'm bringing you my review of Nobody Saves the World. This game was developed by Drinkbox Studios and released on January 18th, 2022. If the studio sounds familiar, then you might know them from their other breakout titles, Guacamelee 1 and 2. However, in contrast to those platformer predecessors, Nobody Saves the World is a top-down action RPG featuring a colorful, zany world and plenty of transformations to fight evil. Is it worth your time? Well, let's get to the review. Also, leave a comment if you've tried this game out and tell me what you thought. The presentation here offers a unique art style that adds a lot of personality to the world and its inhabitants. The world has a lot of detail and each area has its own feel and are fairly distinct from one another. The whole art direction really reminded me of a late 90s, early 2000s cartoon, especially with the different characters you meet. However, I think the enemies could have a bit more variety. I felt by the midway point in the game I saw all the enemy types the game offered, both graphically and gameplay-wise while I'm on the subject. There are slightly different variations to each enemy type that isn't just a complete recolor, but the enemies get really old after a while, especially when almost all the bosses are just larger variations of the standard enemies that the player faces. Lastly, the music here was composed by Jim Guthrie, who also created music for a little game called Super Brothers Sword and Sorcery EP. I remember that game getting a lot of recognition for the soundtrack back in the day, and I remember liking it when I played it. This time around, I felt the tracks were just alright. However, this could be because the songs are used extensively throughout the game, so it quickly became background noise for me as I grinded through the dungeons. The story here is pretty minimal. The player wakes up as nobody, who is actually somebody, with no pants and no memory. He quickly finds a wand that was owned by the great wizard Nostramagus, but he's currently missing. This wand allows the player to change their form starting with a lowly rat, but quickly opening up to other forms with a total of 18. And he'll need this power because there is an evil entity known as the Calamity that is trying to destroy the world. Nobody needs to gather pieces of a mystical shard that will help a great wizard stop the Calamity once and for all. As the player gathers these pieces of the shard, they'll learn more about the main character and their relation to the events of the world. Despite its very minimalistic nature, I did think that the big reveal and explanation later in the game was clever. Much of the writing outside of this main story is done usually with a comical slant. Nobody Saves the World is not trying to take itself seriously, which you could probably guess. I thought the humor was good and appreciated the many references the game made that allowed it to pull from a variety of things not solely from the fantasy genre, such as aliens or nuclear radiation. Dungeons play a big role in this game as well, and I wish more of them had some sort of side story or main story specific background with them. Most have interesting visuals, but not much more than that. Gameplay in Nobody Saves the World plays as a top-down action RPG that focuses on unique, procedurally generated dungeons and a large overworld map to explore. At the start, it runs the player through a quick tutorial and then has them wander through a small section of the world which introduces the dungeons and the larger legendary dungeons which act as gatekeepers to the main story. The start can seem kind of slow for players if they're like me and try to OCD the list of quests they get. As you unlock new forms, such as the rat or a zombie, the only way to level these forms up is to complete specific quests that are relegated to each form. This usually involves using their abilities a specific number of times. Eventually, they become a bit more complicated, requiring the player to set up certain situations for completion, but most can be finished through normal playing of the game. The catch is, a player can quickly become overwhelmed with the number of new quests they'll get once they start unlocking several new forms. This bogs down the start when you're limited in where you can fight and explore, so I would suggest tackling the castle as soon as you think you're able rather than grinding for experience and stars, unless that's your thing. I didn't feel grinding in this game was really necessary that much, but each legendary dungeon did need a certain number of stars to unlock the doors. Again, I felt this could all be achieved through normal gameplay rather than specifically focusing on it, as long as a player was switching out and playing with different forms. Once the player beats the first legendary dungeon, the game world opens up a lot. I really like the exploration in this game and finding all the chests and mana fairies. Exploring the overworld map reminded me a lot of a top-down Zelda game, which I'm sure is where some of the inspiration came from. Also, it's around this time the player's combat options improve with the ability to swap skills in different forms, which opens up so much potential for the game. Up until this point, I could see someone finding the combat loop to be fairly simplistic and easy, maybe even boring. Each form only has a maximum of 3 active abilities and 1 passive, but a complete kit eventually consists of having up to 4 passives and 4 active abilities. Also, each ability has a specific damage type being sharp, blunt, dark, and light, and some can apply status effects such as fear or poison. All these different factors play into how you'll create each form. Fortunately, or maybe not, once a player unlocks this, the game gives them more quests that require them to experiment with different abilities from other forms, which can give them an idea of what might work best together. My particular favorite combination was using the Ranger's passive, which adds poison damage with every hit, the Monk's Holy Light, which attacks all enemies on screen, and the Rat's Detonate Poison ability, which explodes all the enemies that are poisoned. Satisfying every time. The dungeons are where most of this combat takes place. As stated earlier, the dungeons are procedurally generated. While each dungeon can be different in theory, I actually thought that their layouts were too similar. There weren't really any puzzles or many unique rooms that really stood out to me. I think where the dungeons shine are the unique attributes many of them had. This could be having to use a particular type of damage on certain enemies, or something completely unique, such as enemies gaining health every time the player does. These various aspects of the dungeon require the player to really learn what works best and play around with various combinations. In addition, there are various non-combat scenarios that also make the player think outside the box. I really like this, and this system of mixing and matching of the forms, or classes if you will, is the strongest aspect of the game. One of the negative points that I had was the game definitely seemed to be made for a controller. Granted, it does recommend using one, but it also lets a player use a keyboard as well. For the most part, I had no issues with it, other than the radial menu to change forms was a real pain to use at times, especially when I needed to switch quickly. Also, it didn't house all the forms and would only display your most recently used forms, with no way to favorite them to key bindings. And while grinding didn't feel like a big deal to me, and I think it can be done through normal gameplay, it probably depends on the person. I'm someone that really likes checking things off a list and don't mind doing relatively brainless tasks in games at times. Although, if you want to max out the ranks on all the forms, then you'll definitely need to expect some grind, which isn't for everyone. Here I felt the combat was enjoyable enough that it didn't really bother me. So is it all worth it? Yes it is. The game sells for $24.99 USD, but you could actually get it on the Xbox Game Pass as of right now, which is where I played it from. I put about 27 hours into my playthrough, and I did just about everything. I completed all the dungeons, quests, guild missions, and ranked up all the forms to their max. The average time for a normal run, according to how long to beat, seems to be about 14 hours though. There is a New Game Plus mode, but to be honest, I feel like I thoroughly completed everything that I want with it. There is co-op, which sounds appealing, and would be the only way I'd return to this one. That being said, I really enjoyed my time with Nobody Saves the World, and with it being on the Game Pass, it's an absolute no-brainer to try it out if it looks interesting to you. Nobody Saves the World is a great time despite having a slow and simplistic start. The different forms and the ability to customize their loadouts adds just enough complexity, but at the same time not making it too difficult. It's really satisfying when you have a winning combination because of clever thinking. With a great art style and a fun world to explore, I think this one is a good pick for any fans of action RPGs, and for those like me who just have a lukewarm feeling toward the genre. What do you think of Nobody Saves the World? Also, if you played it, what were your favorite forms? Tell me your thoughts about it or any questions that you might have. I hope this helped you in some small way, and if it did, then please leave a like, comment, subscribe, or whatever it is you feel like doing. Thanks for watching, and have a nice day.